What's up guys, and welcome back to another video of Pokemon Switch with me, TheOneIntegral. Now, at the end of last episode, I gave you guys the topic and the question for today, which is format, concerning whether the Pokemon Switch game will be a single or a dual game in terms of its format. Now, initially you might think straight away like, oh yeah, it'd be double, it's always been double, why would it change now? And there are a few different arguments either way as to why it might change and why it might not change. And then, moving on from that, after that, I'm going to be talking about the compromises that could be made to fix those issues to some extent. So, first up, what I mean by this is, assuming Pokemon Stars is the name of the Pokemon Switch game, you could have either a Pokemon Stars single game release, or you could have, as we've had forever, a Pokemon, I don't know, Stars 1, Stars 2, two versions. So, which would it be? Well, let's start off and look at a dual version, okay? We've always had dual versions for the main series, of course, so Red, Blue, Gold, Silver, Ruby, Sapphire, Diamond, Pearl, Black, White, XY, and Sun and Moon. Obviously there are other single games like Emerald and Platinum and some sequel stuff like Black 2, White 2, but for the sort of the new guys of each generation, Gen 1 through to Gen 7, they've always been two games. So why not keep the same format? There really is no other way. The other thing we have to remember is actually the reason we have two games in the first place, and that's to promote trading between players, and is to some extent the reason why Pokemon is so popular to begin with. The initial idea by the developers and the producers was to have two games, and some Pokemon were only available in one game and some Pokemon were only available in the other game, to encourage trading between players to have to achieve the full Pokédex and get some certain Pokemon. So that's the initial idea behind the franchise, and again, would it change the face of the franchise? Would it make it something that's not Pokemon? I saw some people in the last episode in the comment section were talking about how if it wasn't a dual game format, it just wouldn't feel like a Pokemon game. Usually you have Red and Blue and you just got to choose one, or you get both, whatever. So maybe that's why we just keep the dual format, just because that's what Pokemon is. And also, of course, we can't not mention it, it's good for cash. Looking at those double versions, there are very little differences between them. I've already mentioned some Pokemon only being available in others, some not what. Obviously, starting from Gold and Silver, you had a legendary per version, just basically switching them out, and that's a really simple change to do. And there are some more subtle changes in later games, which you can look at later on. But really, it takes very little extra development time to create a second game alongside the first. And this is good for money because there are people out there that will buy both games either on release, or maybe they buy the other one once they finish the first one, but generally some people will buy both games, which doubles Nintendo's profit for very little extra work. So again, there's really no reason for them to change it there. However, why might we want to be switching to a single game format for the Switch? Well, let's not forget that the Switch is a console. A lot of people use it purely handheld. It can be used handheld, but it is a console. It's the replacement to the Wii U and the 3DS. It's a hybrid, so while not necessarily a console, it can be used in a console format, and many consoles, especially now Christmas has come around, will be used as a family console. Let's just talk about for a second the previous Pokemon console games, because there have been some. Colosseum, XD, Battle Revolution, these were single games because it wouldn't make much sense to, of course, initially they're not main series games, so it's not a true comparison, but again, you didn't get a Pokemon Colosseum 1, Pokemon Colosseum 2 because it just wouldn't fit the formula of a console. Also, we can't forget, yes, okay, you have the dual game format so people can trade Pokemon across, but how will trading really work? Obviously, you'll be able to trade between two Switches, that would be pretty standard. However, as I mentioned, the Switch can be used as a home console, and now that Christmas has come around, I'm sure many families will have gotten a Switch, but because of the higher price point, it will likely be used as a home console shared by several siblings or several family members. So how does trading work in terms of the same console? We assume that different profiles would have different save games for a Pokemon game, unless they somehow tie it to the cartridge, in which case that would be terrible. But we assume different profiles have different save games. So can you trade between the profiles, and how does that work? Because you could just go on your one profile and be like, yo, I'm just gonna not tell you and trade all your Pokemon from yours to mine, and then you could restart a new save game but keep all your Pokemon still. It's a bit iffy, the trading stuff, and there will be a video in the future, but does this change it? Does the fact that some families only have one console, so really it doesn't really work in that sense. Yeah, if it's got a shared console, both kids really end up the same, because the idea originally was, you know, you had a Game Boy Advance, your brother or sister had a Game Boy Advance, you got Ruby, they got Sapphire, boom, you can then trade when you find certain Pokemon. However, if you're sharing one Switch, is there really much point in one of you getting Pokemon Stars 1, one of you getting Pokemon Stars 2, because only one game can be played at a time, only one person can use it at a time, so is there really much point? You know, you just get the one game and then both kids would play that single game, because the reason you would get two games originally is because you wouldn't buy one copy of Pokemon Ruby when each kid had their own Game Boy Advance and say, oh, you can have it like now and then you can have it later on. That generally didn't happen. You would buy both games for that reason, but for the Switch you don't have to do that, unless of course they do have separate consoles, in which case that's fine, that's the same as always, but we have to remember the higher price point is going to change how things work here. But we also have to think, we talked about money for the dual game format. If we continue to have a dual game format, how much money would it cost the consumer? So if I bought both Pokemon Sun and Pokemon Moon at launch, it would cost me about $80. If I were to go to buy both copies of a Pokemon Switch game on launch, assuming a $60 price point, of course that's going to cost $120, which is a 50% increase in price. Now, am I sort of, am I going to do that? Am I that sort of dedicated of a fan? A lot of fans will drop off at this point and say, I could have spent $80 to get both, but I can't do $120, that's too much. So maybe that's, the reason why some people drop off, and then obviously Nintendo's not getting that double profit per, for two games rather than just the one, so maybe that's the reason they would move away from it. However, I'd say currently it's more likely that we carry on with a dual game format, because even if people only get one game, that's fine. They've got their one game, they can play the one game. If they want to spend the extra money to get both, go ahead. Of course, you can argue like, oh, well, I don't want to be spending like $60 for sort of 3/4 of a game when I can't get some other stuff, but that's beside the point. So how could we compromise between these two sort of ideas and justify having two games, or justify having a single game in terms of how it would work? So in terms of dual compromise, okay, so the main downsides to having two games are the fact that either the kids have to share it, but it's basically the same game. Okay, we're talking about basically the same game. So am I going to be spending $120 to get the same game twice, but I can catch like a Totodile in one and a Cyndaquil in the other? I don't know if I'm confident doing that. So we have to talk about the differences between the two games. As I mentioned, most of the time it's just Pokemon, legendaries, etc. Sun and Moon and Ultra Sun and Moon also introduce the time difference stuff. However, it's not really the best thing to do for differences, because cool, okay, I guess it means like if I'm playing Sun it's the day, and if I'm playing Moon it's generally the night, because I'm playing at the same time, I suppose. But it doesn't really affect the story at all or anything like that. The one thing it doesn't make annoying is evolving your Rockruff into Dusk like Camerock, because it's like 5 AM in the morning if you're doing it on Pokemon Moon, which is a bit crazy. Anyway, there have been other differences in other games. For example, Black and White, and I think Black 2 and White 2, there was the White Forest in the White versions, and the Black City, which were just different areas. White Forest gave you opportunity to catch Pokemon, Black City gave you opportunity to battle people, so there was a larger difference there. However, it was just the one city, and in that case it just felt a bit off. And of course there have been other ones in terms of the story. Team Aqua and Team Magma were the same thing, we had that there. So you could have some changes between the two games, maybe different characters, your rival maybe is different in one or the other, different professor even, or you have two twins that are both professors, and one is the main one in one game and one's in the other game. Different evil team, as we've seen with Team Aqua and Team Magma. However, we could get even larger, and one, I think it's a pretty good idea I had, was having a different Pokédex per game. So of course currently we have version exclusives, but why not expand on that? Why not make it larger? So rather than both games sharing the same exact Pokédex but some just not being available, both games have their own Pokédex. Okay, so it's the same region, they're just different universes, yeah? Maybe you have similar sort of things like, okay, the starters are the same between the two games, the legendaries are the same, and some Pokemon are the same, but for the most part, say you have the Mareep line in one, or the Vulpix line in one, let's say, and then the Growlithe line in the other, but they're not in each other's Pokédexes. Vulpix and Ninetales are in, Stars 1, Growlithe and Arcanine are in Stars 2, so you don't necessarily need to trade between them to complete the Pokédex, but you could trade between them to get those Pokemon still. So maybe that would defeat the purpose of version exclusives, because you just have to trade to do your own Pokédex, but I think it would still make it pretty cool to have different sets of Pokemon, and this sort of fixes the Pokedex problem, which I'm probably doing a video on in the future. The fact that we have loads of Pokemon now, so you can't fit them all in one game really, hence why Nintendo's, or Game Freak rather, have now removed the National Pokedex, because you can't expect people to fill it up. So that would sort of fix it, because then in one pair of games you could provide more Pokemon, because currently it's, I don't know, Sun and Moon and X and Y had like 300 per National Pokedex, or per Regional Pokedex. So rather than having to do a huge one like 300, maybe you have 200 on one game and 200 on another game, and you've done 400, which is more than you've been able to achieve anyway. So that's one other idea. Again, we can go back to differences in terms of like the evil teams. Story differences. This could be a big thing. We'd love to see some story differences between the two versions, because let's face it, all throughout the thing, let's look at Diamond and Pearl, okay? How does the story differ between Pokemon Diamond and Pokemon Pearl? Oh yeah, when you get to Spear Pillar, Dialga's there in Diamond and Palkia is there in Pearl. That's it. There is no story difference at all. Imagine two sets of games where the story does differ. You could have different evil teams, but different sort of, things to happening rather than just Aqua and Magma. You could even have some sort of different plot flow, so you go through the region in a different way, so you battle the gyms in a different order, which could definitely shake up the two versions, and would, for me, encourage me to buy both versions, because I play one game and I can play the other game later on, and it's a different feeling. I don't have to, like I'm playing through Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon right now. I've already played through it once. I'm like halfway through my second playthrough, and I've still got 3 copies to play through. That's going to feel like a total chore, because it's exactly the same game as I've played before. Whereas if the story was different and I had to, meet Pokemon in a different order, battle gyms in a different order, that would give a different feel to it, and there'd be actually something different to the games, as opposed to just there's a Pokemon there and there's a Pokemon there. Those are just my thoughts in terms of compromising the dual versions to make them worth those $120. But let's assume they do go down to one single version for the Switch, because it's a console-like console. How do they sort of fix those problems that could occur? So obviously you've got no trading, because there's no version exclusive, so you've got a single version. How do you sort of fix those issues to make it still like a Pokemon game? Well, one idea is you have some difference in Pokemon available due to in-game choices. Now, we're not talking Telltale, for example, but for, say you choose Bulbasaur as your starter, maybe there are certain grass types available, less grass types available, for example, because you have a Bulbasaur. If you choose Charmander, there's less fire types available, and you just shake up the same Pokedex across one game, same Pokedex, but some Pokemon then just become either rarer or less available, depending on your starter or depending on other choices in the game. So obviously when you get to the legendary part, say you have 2 legendaries still for your box art, Solgaleo, Lunala for example, say when you get to that part, you get to choose which legendary you get or you battle, whatever, or some choice earlier in the game affects it later on. Something like that. Of course, it would be a bit iffy for a Pokemon game, because then there might be some random question you get asked, say like, hey, player, do you prefer the sun or the moon? Ah, sun. And then later on you find out, oh, that means I'm getting Solgaleo and I can't get Lunala. I wanted Lunala. Ah, that sort of thing might get annoying. So that's the reason they might not want to do that. So, but it's another choice. So the other thing they could do, of course, you got $60, not profit, but $60 revenue from a single game being sold, is do something that Zelda is doing, and that is downloadable content or DLC. Zelda Breath of the Wild is the first Zelda game to include downloadable content. Of course, there's also the possibility that Mario Odyssey is going to get it. I'm hoping for it, I suppose. I think it's going to happen. You could give them a couple new kingdoms in Mario Odyssey, which would really spice it up. So how would DLC for Pokemon work? Now, this really needs a whole different video, but you could have like a new area like the Seville Isles to unlock with some form of new story. Of course, you might need some level of scaling mechanic there, because if it comes out 2 months after the games, all your team is level 100, and then you find yourself just one-shotting everything, that's not going to be fun. So they would have to adapt it somehow, but I think it'd be cool. Or you could have some mechanic-based things, so for example swarms could be added to the game like we saw in Diamond and Pearl and previous games since, so like you can find some new Pokemon via these swarms that have been added, or just new areas, maybe a couple new areas open up and you can find some new Pokemon there. DLC is a bit of a weird thing for Pokemon, because what do you do? Like, oh yeah, you can now catch a Snubbull. Yay! Thanks for the $20, but depending on how they did it, it could work, and DLC would add like, maybe $20 cost, so that brings up, assuming people would buy the DLC, which of course, if you used to buy both copies of the game, you're generally going to be buying the DLC, that would up the overall cost to $80, and that would, I think, be the same as a double 3DS version, which might work and might make sense there. So that's the compromise for a single game. You could have some in-game choices to affect what Pokemon appear, but that's not really again in the spirit of Pokemon. But they could do the big jump, similar to how Zelda's done the big jump to open world now. Pokemon could do the big jump to not necessarily have in-game choices like Telltale, but you know, some level of variation in how you play. So when you replay again, your story is different as opposed to being the same, you know, follow the leader over and over and over. Just a few ideas there, of course. But we'll see what happens in the end in terms of, I think it's going to be dual games, but it could be a single game if they want to be more precise. But for the next video, we are going to be talking about Kanto Remake. The question being, could we revisit the Kanto region on the Switch? So is it possible that they'll be doing some form of Kanto game as a sort of throwback to push up sales, basically? Let me know your thoughts on that down below in the comment section, and also your thoughts on the format sort of debate as well. Would you prefer 2 games on the Switch, or would you prefer a single game because you don't want to be buying £120 worth of games when they're practically the same? Let me know down below in the comment section, but this will be it for me for today, so I shall see you next time. Thank you for watching. Goodbye, my friends.